If all the candidates could take their seats, please. We're not quite at 8 o'clock, so this would be the time to take pictures of them, if that's what you want to do. And to take selfies, if you want to do that up at the front. So why don't we begin? If everyone could take their seats, that would be great. Welcome. My name is Reverend Stephen Milton, and I'm the lead minister here at Lawrence Park Community Church. Tonight's All Candidates meeting is being held here because this was the home church of the late Jay Robinson. She worshiped here, her kids went through Sunday school here. This was where she found her spiritual roots, and so it seemed like a logical place to have this meeting. There's another reason why we're here in a church tonight, and that's because during the pandemic, as many of you know, if you live in this ward, a shelter was opened down at Roehampton. The Roehampton Hotel was turned into a shelter. It was a controversial decision at the time, and there's a group of 8 United Churches which run along the Yonge Street corridor from Bloor up to the 401. And we said, what can we do to help? You know, Jesus calls us as Christians to help those who are oppressed and homeless and sick and those who are marginalized. And that certainly applied to people who were homeless and living in a shelter in the middle of a pandemic. So we asked, what can we do to help? So a few of us ministers started attending the monthly meetings that the Roehampton shelter held, and then we reported back to our congregations. And we created a committee called the Roehampton Friendlies. And that committee still exists, even though the Roehampton shelter is closed. Now, the thing that we learned in those years during COVID was that it became clear that the reason people are homeless isn't because of any personal fault, but because of systemic problems. Bad policy, a lack of housing which could be avoided, and which other cities around the world do avoid, but here in Toronto we have a problem. So we started trying to learn more about the issues, and so when this by-election was called, we said, this is our chance to ask some questions of the people who want to represent this ward on City Council. And so that's why we're here tonight. And I thank all of you, both online and in person, for taking an interest in these really important issues. So tonight's meeting is going to focus just on housing questions. We'll be asking 2 questions about homelessness, 2 on social housing, and 2 on affordable housing. Our questions are inspired by questions which were sent in by congregants who live in the neighborhood, as well as people who live on the streets and in social housing. We have sent the questions in advance to the candidates because we wanted to get good, well-researched answers rather than just something they spontaneously dreamt up. So thank you in advance for your consideration of these questions. Now, you can see there's a lot of people on this stage. And they've asked, well, could we each give an opening statement? Well, that would be 22 minutes right there. So instead of allowing opening and closing statements, we've decided we're just going to ask 6 questions, and we can't ask the same question of every candidate. That would also take forever. So they know which questions they'll be asked to answer. And if everybody keeps to their time, and we're giving people 2 minutes to speak, and there's a timer on the computer back there where you see the wavy color, that will be the countdown clock. If everybody keeps to their time, we should have time for questions from the floor after they've answered the 6 questions. Finally, a few housekeeping detail. For the folks who are in-house, there are washrooms down the hall that way. I would ask you, if you could please, to put your cell phones to silent or turn them off. Nobody wants this to be interrupted by the ringing of a cell phone. This discussion is also being streamed onto YouTube, so folks, it's being recorded on YouTube, so people will be able to watch it after the fact as well. So now, before we get to our first question, we'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on land that has been home to Indigenous people for thousands of years. They were here as the glaciers receded some 12,000 years ago. They were here on the tundra. They saw the evergreens take root. And then, a few thousand years later, the deciduous trees. They've seen the colors turn each fall for hundreds of generations. They saw all of this long before any Europeans arrived and long before any Africans were forced to come here. This land was cared for by people who felt that they belonged to the land rather than the land belonging to them. This has been home to the Wendat, to the Haudenosaunee, the Petun, and the Mississaugas of the Credit, as well as many other First Nations. And today, Toronto is home to some 80,000 Indigenous people, including Inuit, Métis, and First Nations peoples. And they continue to call for justice and fairness in our way of relating to each other and the land that we call home. So our first round of questions will be about homelessness. Over the past 10 years, the number of people who are living on the streets and in shelters has continued to rise steadily. The shelter system is always at capacity, turning away up to 200 people a night. With nowhere else to sleep, people resort to sleeping on the TTC and in encampments and in ravines. Last year, an Ontario Superior Court decision ruled that it was unfair and unlawful to clear an encampment in Waterloo when no other shelter was available. So our first question is, what is your position on encampments at a time when there is no other shelter available, as it is now? Are you in favor of clearing encampments? And where do you propose people sleep if there is no room in the shelters? And the first person to answer this question will be Rachel Chernos-Lynn. You have 2 minutes, as soon as starting now.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay,
Yes.
it's on. Okay, well, thank you very much for that introduction. So I will say to the start that I don't want to see people living in parks. I just don't think that that is humane or particularly safe. And I think our public green spaces should be available to everyone. And that's really important, that they feel safe for families and for everybody to use them. There have been so many stories of people experiencing violence and abuse, as well as fires in the encampments. And so I am concerned that, these are not really where we want to be as a city. But that said, I'm certainly not calling for violent encampment clearings. In fact, it's not really even an option, I would say, because the city has moved away from this policy after the Ombudsman report came out on encampment clearings during the pandemic. I really believe that we need all hands on deck at the city to address the encampments that exist already. And what we need is an outreach model where folks from streets to home are out there in the parks making contact with individuals who are there and offering services that are available. I really think this is where we have to be, which is making sure we're providing outreach and providing help, because we know that there are people who really need medical help and other services, and that's really where our focus should be. When there is no room in our shelter system, which is happening far too often, I think that's when it's time that we have to pull every single lever we can at the city to make sure that we can create spaces. And I think that part of this lies with the provincial and federal governments to be providing funding and support. And I will say that as chair of the Toronto District School Board, this is somewhere where I have done considerable work, working with all levels of government to secure funding. And so I think this is going to be very important. Thank you.
And our next speaker is Habiba Desi.
Hello, so thank you for having us, and I guess God protect all of us and bless us and our families. I will answer this because we did get a chance to use research because we got the question, so all of us had access to AI. So I can tell you what AI says, which is one of the more intelligent answers, and then I can tell you a little bit of my perspective. So it's temporary shelter expansion during the winter months, supportive housing initiative, so that's long-term focus on building more supportive housing, which is something like Dr. Buzari has done right now with one of the hospitals, where people that are regularly attending the emergency rooms, now they're given permanent supportive housing, and that just opened. So it's supporting initiatives like that, I support that. And then the safe outdoor spaces. So if there are no indoor spaces available, then designated safe outdoor spaces. But I think the issue of homelessness, I want to bring down to youth, so street kids, and also children in care. So children in care are also homeless. But because our system is humane compared to other countries throughout the world, we're not seeing the kids that are abandoned or become orphans on the streets. But they are also street children. And then children in care right now, they're dying. They are dying. And now they're going to do an audit. An audit is not enough. Okay, after an audit, action has to be taken. So what's going to be the action? Because a lot of these children in care, they don't want to be in care because it's so violent that they end up on the streets. And then once they're in the streets, now there's a cycle of homelessness. Now, within that cycle, their life expectancy is a lot less than the rest of us. So it's a genocide. It's a genocide on the orphans in this country. So I want to bring that into play, and then we look at what kind of children are in care. It's Black lives and Indigenous lives. So we're looking at not just a homelessness on the Indigenous people that happened because of the larger genocide, but right now a genocide on them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Anthony Fury, you're next.
Thank you, Reverend. My name's Anthony Fury. Nice to meet you all. I'm running so I can focus on public safety issues, fiscal responsibility, easing congestion, and bringing common sense values to City Hall. And part of that broader theme is related to how Toronto seems like a city in decline for so many people, that this isn't the city that it used to be, whether that's for people who've lived here for many years, for new immigrants, for people traveling for business, for work. And part of that sense that Toronto is failing to live up to its potential and declining is the scenes we see on our streets are very sad and are not indicative of a city heading in a good direction. Now, we've seen the rise and decline of great North American cities before, Detroit, obviously New York decades ago, Oakland, San Francisco, Vancouver, and we can't move one more step in that direction. We have to try and turn all of that around. And obviously our homelessness strategies, our social housing, our affordable housing strategies, they play a major role in all of that, making sure this is a city that we can be proud of to live in, and making sure it's a city that we still want to live in. Knocking on doors all across this ward, the number of people who say, we're thinking of getting out of Dodge, I mean, it's quite something, and a couple of you in the foyer telling me a similar thing. So we absolutely need to be dealing with all of these issues to really give a shine to our city again. The things that used to hear about Toronto, what was it, New York run by the Swiss or something? I mean, that stuff is just not true anymore. I do not support encampments in public spaces, in parks where families use, close to playgrounds, because I have a families first policy as the father of 3 children who's run into needles in playgrounds where you didn't used to see them before. But that includes creating the services where people can get access to warming centers, respite shelters, and so forth. And if I may praise Olivia Chow here, I think she's very right to ask Mr. Trudeau for the funding to make up for the fact that almost half of the occupants in the shelter system are recent refugees. So we've got to be talking to other levels of government as well to deal with these issues.
Thank you. And Peter Henges. Yep, you're on.
Good evening. My name is Peter Henges. Good to be with you this evening. First and foremost, I am running as your counselor as looking into the circumstances of where our current lived experience is to focus on this question. I understand the sentiment of where the judge ruled, but nobody made an attempt to either challenge the decision to be a little more centric into the area as opposed to province-wide. It is unfortunate for where we look as we go about our daily lives once we leave our homes, whether we're public transit or driving around, where encampments are a little more frequent, and there's root cause to just about anything. And if I look in an honest manner, okay, and I look everybody in the eye here, from the time where pandemic was approaching and everything started to lock down and shut down, that threw everybody into a matter of despair. We've all been affected. How about those people in those encampments? For the effort that was made, recently it was announced after 400 some odd days that Allen Gardens, there was a measure of success. In order to deal with the homeless problem, we have to look at drug and alcohol abuse and all other addiction substances. Okay, they're a significant catalyst towards this problem. For anybody else that are not part of that lifestyle but do find themselves, okay, homeless in these tents, where is the uproar? Where is the outcry for additional jobs and factories being reopened in the province? I'm not suggesting that Ward 15 start raising, acreage to build factories, but there are factories, okay, east of here and west of here, where, if given the, if
Thank you. Sorry, 2 minutes goes by quickly. Thank you for your answers to our first question. Our second question comes from the Toronto Underhoused and Homeless Union, also known as TUHU. They are a union that formed last year, composed of people who have lived on the streets or still do. They formed because up until now, city policies about homelessness have usually been drawn up by politicians and bureaucrats without much, if any, formal consultation with people with lived experience of homelessness. Our North Toronto cluster of churches and the Roehampton Friendlies has been working with the union for the past year. So this is their question. How do you plan to consult and engage people in experiencing homelessness and underhousing when shaping the policies that will affect us? And the first person who gets to answer this question is Saeed Jaffrey. You're on.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So to solve this issue, you have to be on both sides, right? So you have to understand how politicians and bureaucrats think. And if you're on the other side, let's say if you're using the community housing or you're homeless, you have to understand what problems you're facing. Basically, I happen to be on both sides. I grew up with a lot of politicians and bureaucrats. I have a doctorate degree and I'm a research scientist, from UCLA, Los Angeles, where I grew up, got all my training. I was a trained student leader, so that's where I learned how to negotiate and, be part of the debates and whatnot, how to convince the stakeholders. So I could do this really efficiently, and I'm the best person for this job. The way it works right here, I'm working as a land developer and real estate agent. So we had solution for this issue. So right now we have 15% community housing. We need to increase it to 40%. To bring stakeholders to do that, we have to convince them, give them tax breaks. So that's how it's going to work. But they say, we're getting more money from Kitchener than here. Why should we invest in Toronto? So we have to convince them, make a deal. Say, we give you tax breaks over 10 years or 15 years. Or we give them more incentives, that we give them another second project, to build a park where they can make more money, or give them like a private deal, let's say an ocean front, where they can recover their money. So you have to really, really kind of cater to them, and play mind games with them, because they're bureaucrats, so they think how to make money, how to just make the project successful. So you make them happy, and then they'll make us happy, So our problems is solved. We get 40% housing, and a lot of waiting period, which is 14 years now, will be reduced to a lot less. So that's my solution to the problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And the next person to address this question about how to engage people experiencing homelessness and underhousing when shaping policy is Sam Robinson.
So my name is Sam Robinson, and I thank you for this question. I believe consulting with people experiencing homelessness and underhousing is essential. It's also essential that when doing so, we are inclusive and understanding. It's not just about inviting people in, it's about meeting them where they feel safe and respected. If elected, my first step would be to reach out to the key stakeholders and organizations like the Toronto Underhoused and Homeless Union. They have invaluable real-life experiences and they understand what the current system overlooks. My goal would be to build a long-term engagement plan with the underhoused and homeless community, to listen to their concerns and suggestions on how we can help, whether that help comes in the form of a warm meal, a place to sleep, employment, mental health, or addiction services, or just someone to talk to. Positive change starts with understanding, and understanding starts with listening. Thus, we need informal, accessible meetings and welcoming spaces like community centers, public libraries, and food banks. These places are where we can all sit together, no podiums, no stages, and ensure a genuine, comfortable exchange. To make these meetings more accessible, we should make sure transit fare is covered to those who need it, along with nutritious food and drinks. We should offer both daytime and evening sessions. This would help reach a large group of people who are underhoused and working minimum wage jobs. Listening to their stories and experiences will give us a better ability to design policies that work. We can make Toronto a safer and more inclusive city for all, a city in which we all have the ability to thrive. We just need our leaders to listen, not only to the homeowners and tenants, but also to those underhoused who one day, if given the support and understanding they so desperately need, may have the chance to get back on their feet and become thriving members of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next person to answer this question is Shaklo Sharipova.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm so honored to be here and discuss these important issues for our ward. So community engagement is my power, and I've learned a few lessons which I would like to highlight right now. Lesson number one is we have to engage the most affected from the start. Because if we fail them engage these people from the start, it will delay all the policies and going back and forth. So that's why I would prioritize early engagement with people directly impacted by housing instability and homelessness, as well as others in the community, including different income brackets, racial and ethnic groups, renters, homeowners, and local businesses. This process ensures that policy development is guided by the lived experience of a diverse population. Number two is I will create a community stakeholder task force, a dedicated task force with representatives from various housing advocacy groups, local residents facing housing insecurity. And this group would work closely with me, consistently advising on housing strategies and helping refine policies based on ground realities. Number three is regarding community outreach and meetings. I would hold regular community meetings, workshops, and town halls to discuss these issues. And outreach would include on-the-ground engagement in spaces frequented by people experiencing homelessness to reach those who may not attend traditional meetings. Neighborhood-based outreach, such as dispersed community meetings. And all materials and presentations would be in accessible, non-technical language with translations available in other languages as needed. Next would be, of course, actively listening to all voices. Also, I would like to partner with and fund community-based organizations by collaborating with trusted local organizations that work directly with underhoused and homeless individuals. We can strengthen outreach and ensure that policies reflect the community needs. Also, I believe in...
Thank you very much. Next is Sheena Sharp.
Okay, thank you. Well, I can tell you what I did do, for better or worse. I live about 150 meters from the Roehampton Hotel. So as you've already heard, it was a homeless shelter. During COVID, there were needles in the schoolyards, there were people wandering around backyards, caused a lot of concern among residents. It was a bit of a shit show, to use a technical term. So during the last election when I ran, I thought it might be an issue, and I wanted to know the facts. I want to understand what was happening on the ground. So I did a bunch of research. I made a list of all of the people who had ever spoken on it, and I called them. And that is how I first met Reverend Milton, because I called him and learned about your program to provide welcome baskets to the shelter. I learned what city staff were doing to clean up the needles, and I spoke to the guy who was the biggest critic, who conceded that things were much better. So I think we can give ourselves a bit of, a pat on the back in that our community stepped up and made things better than it was before we started. I think that city councilors can't possibly design all the programs. City staff have to design programs. They have to hire the right people with on-the-ground experience. But I think city councilors more do a sniff test, asking around the neighborhood, understanding what's going on, in order to test to see if what comes to the council table is a good idea. I see city council role as more like a coach, not a player. And I do think that my background and experience as a development consultant for nonprofits, affordable housing, and in designing multifamily housing from semis to walk-ups would be an asset on city council as we review programs to address homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're now going to move into a section of questions about social housing. The city is the landlord of thousands of units of housing which exist to provide deeply affordable housing to people who cannot afford to live in apartments at regular market rates. Many of these people experience disabilities or cannot work for some reason. Others are the working poor who simply can't afford the city's astronomical housing prices. Currently, there are 80,000 people on the waiting list for social housing in Toronto. 80,000. According to the City of Toronto's website, the current average wait time for a two-bedroom apartment is 13 years. So the question is, what will you do as city councillor to increase the amount of social housing available in Toronto and this ward, and to reduce the wait for Toronto community housing? And the first person to answer this question is Jason Stevens.
Thank you, Minister, and to all of you, it's been an absolute pleasure to meet you. So let me answer the question by going back to my teenage years and living with my family. My father was a civil servant who worked at Queen's Park, and my mom shared the very same values, those egalitarian values that most people in this room share and that most Canadians share, and that is to not trample on the most vulnerable. When I was in my 20s, I worked with a group called the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, and I also worked with United Church Ministers and fought against the cuts to the homeless by the Harris government. As I'm older, I don't work with OCAP anymore. I don't necessarily agree with some of their tactics, but I think that their intent to lift the homeless out of poverty is absolutely something I agree with. In Finland, I'm going to do something, let's have a little joy. Is anyone here from Finland? Show of hands. Someone with Finnish background? Very few. Well, I would congratulate. Finland is one of the only countries in the world that has actually reduced homelessness. So as a city councillor, I would adopt the model that Finland pursued. If Finland can reduce homelessness by placing housing, small units of 100 that houses the homeless as a priority, if Finland can do it, Toronto, Ontario, Canada can do it. Finland takes a model that doesn't say a homeless person has to resolve all their issues like drug addiction or mental health or no issues before housing them. I've been fighting homelessness for 30 years, and yesterday, just as a human being, I bought a homeless person, Brian, in my neighborhood, as I wrote in that letter that was on your chair, a coffee, because that's the values. Okay. Those are my values.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Can I just ask my staff to cast a little more light on that end of the table so that they'll... Nope. Nope. We'll get there. There we go. Excellent. Okay. Now that we can see you, Leslie Stoyan, it's your turn to answer the question.
Okay, the numbers that you just heard are unacceptable. So truly, what can one city councillor do? Number one, have the skill set to develop, lobby, maintain, and enhance our outside partnerships with organizations like Raising the Roof, the Neighborhood Group, Wigwamen, that develop supportive housing initiatives. We need to be strong enough and have the language to stand up to developers and demand that their proposals have enough allocations for affordable units. The city's new inclusionary zoning policy requires that new builds have to have 5 to 10% allocation, and that will grow to 22% by 2030. New York has the 80-20 policy, and they've had it in place since 1985, where 20% of new builds must be affordable housing, and it has worked well. So it's time for us to fast track. Number two, we have to protect the community of Thorncliffe Park from the provincial platforms that are coming for that land with the advancement of the Ontario line, and councillors have to vote no to every motion that says otherwise. We need to identify the neighborhoods within the ward boundaries that are good locations for affordable houses and supportive housing, ensuring that it's the right place so that vulnerable communities are set up for success. We need to ensure that our social services are in place for our vulnerable communities, and this is where my award-winning skill set comes in. Maintaining existing partnerships with organizations like Homeless Connect, CAMH, and scrutinizing the wasteful spending of our overall budget to make sure that the allocation is being directed to these crucial services. We also finally need to ensure that we elect a candidate that is truly community-driven, not influenced by partisan politics. TCHC is wholly owned by the city, but its operational development is dependent on provincial and federal governments. We have to have an independent council working directly with our partners and city staff to solve this complex crisis.
Thank you very much. And Daniel Trays, you are next.
So hello everybody, my name is Daniel Trays, and I'd like to start as I have at every other event, and that is by thanking Councillor Robinson for her service to the people of Ward 15. She's definitely going to be missed. A little bit about me. I was an assistant to Councillor Paul Ainsley at City Hall and served 5 out of Toronto's 31 neighbourhood improvement areas directly. I was homeless from 1997 to 2016, and I've served on the board of directors for the Inner City Family Health Team from 2021 to present. That's a group that handles all the housing and homeless situations in downtown Toronto. We make decisions on multi-million-dollar budgets, which have a mandate from the city and the province and are balanced. Community engagement and experience are the keys to success. We need to build up, out, and all around, and different things work for different folks in different areas. So community engagement is the number one things, and experience. Those are the two things that are key to success. A major part of the housing issues in Ward 15 is helping seniors to age in place. In order to be successful, you need to be someone with actual experience at City Hall, in the field, and you need to be somebody who can work well with everybody and not just the Ontario Liberal Party. I have and will work well with all 3 levels of government, and I must stress, I'm the only candidate that has any experience on the 2nd floor of City Hall as a constituency assistant. So with this and everything else involved on November 4th, I just hope I can count on your support, and thanks for coming out tonight, and thanks for everybody for hosting us.
Thank you very much. Our next question. Toronto provides social housing through Toronto Community Housing. It manages hundreds of buildings. And yet, in 2022, the Toronto Star reported that the TCHC buildings consistently received the lowest ratings for maintenance quality among all rental properties in the city, based on the city's own inspections by RentSafeTO. At the same time, many of these buildings receive rents from tenants such as food banks in their buildings, money which should go towards the upkeep of the buildings. So our question is, what will you do to increase the quality of maintenance at these city-owned properties, which are home to many residents who live below the poverty line, who cannot afford market-based housing? And the first person to answer will be Habiba Dessay.
Hello. Okay, well, I was going to take this question and bring it over to my platform, but the basic answer is a cooperative. I actually took from Shaklo, what she talked about was the parks, to hire locally to help clean up the park. So it's the same idea within the buildings. Why can't we have cleaning cooperatives? So one would be industrial and then the other would be household, right? So we can even provide, because supportive housing, some of it is just cleanliness, right? And then within the building, if there was already a cooperative of ladies, and it could be part-time as well, and it could be people that are retired or single mothers. So there's a lot of opportunities there. But what I want to bring it down to is 75 Thorncliffe Park Drive. As much as the social housing buildings have maintenance issues, this is one of the worst buildings in the city. And it's a private building, and 50% of it is Crown Corporation owned, PSP Investments, which is part of the pensions that they invest, and then the other part is privately owned Starlight Invest. I don't want to say the wrong company name, but Starlight. So this is a privately owned company right now. The tenants in Thorncliffe Park, which is Ward 15, they are on strike. They've been on a rent strike for over a year. CBC did a speech about it. None of the other candidates have even brought it up. This is a very serious issue. We're looking at long-term tenants that are going to get evicted. Where are they going to go? So I want to make it into a social housing building. Yeah. Where we're going to say that, you know what, the cleanliness of it is already lacking to the level of the other social housing buildings, so now make it social housing, because a lot of the people within that building are already on a list to get social housing, but they still haven't received it. So now it's rent geared to income for the ones that can't afford it, and then the other part of it, because there's renovations going on, and then the renovations is now increasing the rent, and now there's no rent control, but everyone that promises you affordable housing is a lie. There's no law in Ontario right now that developers have to even provide affordable housing, and the City of Toronto is trying to get that through with Doug Ford, but that's been going on for over 2 years, and they say it's sitting on the minister's table. So right now there is no affordable housing. So people that are, thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Anthony Fury.
So one recurring phenomenon I've had while knocking on doors and meeting with people across the ward is people in apartment buildings talk about how the rent goes up, and sometimes it goes up above the guidelines because there are sometimes legitimate reasons. If you put in a major thing like a new swimming pool or whatnot, you're allowed to increase it above the legal guideline. But more and more now buildings are coming up with, I think, increasingly fishy justifications for doing that. Because the landlord and tenant tribunal is incredibly backlogged, you don't get justice for anyone there. Tenants who are not paying their rent, the landlord can't get justice. Landlords who are not fulfilling their obligations, they can't get justice. So we have a major problem there in that backlog. And tenants are incredibly frustrated that they're paying more and more, and they feel like they're getting less in many respects. When I was door knocking with my supporters in Thorncliffe Park and some of the buildings there was one building that we went into where there was such a long line that didn't move. It's like people were waiting to go into a concert or to board an airplane or something. They're just waiting for their elevators, but there's 3 elevator banks. 2 of them were out, and these were very tall buildings. And when we finally got up there, we spoke to a guy on one of the top floors, and he said he almost took his mother to hospital because she walked up and down, and she was a lady who had had some health issues and mobility issues, and it was just, you know, a major concern for her to actually have done that, and she ended up having a health issue because of all of that. People who are paying rent, you know, higher than they were before, not getting the basic services. So what is one of the answers you can do as a city councillor? If buildings are not fulfilling their obligations, you can bring a city inspector into the building, and this applies whether it's a private building, but Toronto Community Housing should not be immune from this. And this is one problem. Sometimes they are because they are city workers. And you say, look guys, there's a law here and there's lease obligations. So as councillor, I would bring those city inspectors in, and then what happens is you say, we're issuing a work order for you. If you don't do the work order, we come in and we hire someone to do it, and we put a lien against your property to do it. So I think when we have more affordability concerns than ever, and people are wondering, you know, how do I pay the bills, this is an approach we really have to take.
Thank you very much. And next, Peter Henges.
To reflect a couple of words on my last question, I by no means have any bad feeling or bad intent to where homeless encampments and the people occupying are today. But we have to step back and be sober how we're going to realistically triage the situation regarding the homeless encampments and offer everybody a lift up. To answer this question, I think that it's high time to actually come to an understanding that there's a lot of our problems, including this one here with Toronto Community Housing, that are engineered results. And this has been in the making for a long, long time. And as long as the status quo, getting up in the morning, fulfilling whatever workload, and then going home, and then having people bearing the brunt of very, very sketchy behavior from the staff of it. Now, there's different layers. And why not entertain the fact of actually, I don't mean it as a threat, but with logic and levity, to actually say to people that, you know what, if it's performance-based that you're after, then measure up. If not, get fired. And maybe perhaps this should be reflected in union negotiations. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much. And next, Saeed Jaffrey.
So in addition to many problems housing has, one, I think, question here asked is quality of maintenance, how I'm going to increase quality of maintenance. So again, it's all about funding. I think once I called, there was a leak issue. So when I called housing to fix it, they said it was going to take 2 hours because they outsourced the maintenance just to, cut their spending on it. So they were on a budget. So, when they're outsourcing, the maintenance basically compromised. So to fix that, what I can suggest, or what I'm going to do, is require a direct deposit from the tenants, which keeps the funding in place. So everyone is paying on time. So the funds are there, and they create a reserve fund. So in case of emergency, you don't have to wait 2 hours or something, 3 hours for someone to get the attention right away, and for emergency issues. So that will increase the maintenance quality, right? And another thing you can do is, think smartly, have smart planning, where you can get funding to restore historic places. A lot of community housing are based in historic homes and stuff. And then to preserve history, so you have to, we can apply for funding to preserve history, and you get money to maintain these homes. So that will also help the people who live there. Because I had a few students who were doing PhD in Toronto history and whatever, history of architecture. So they came over to just look at the places. Some homes are 100 years old. So they, oh my God, it looks amazing. Such and such family used to live here. So at least they should restore the whole place. At least it looks presentable. So you can get funding from that area, and then you can maintain the home. So you have to think smart and then get more funding that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So our last two questions address the issue of affordable housing. As we're all aware, Toronto has a grave shortage of deeply affordable housing. Despite new laws created by the provincial government to fast-track the building of new homes and apartments, there's still a dearth of new housing in Toronto. At the same time, condos continue to be built, which are too expensive and too small for the people who would like to afford them. This is especially true for people who want to have a family and cannot fit in a one-bedroom apartment. Our housing prices, both for ownership and rentals, have increased far quicker than wages, so that even wealthy people have grown children living in their homes, well after the time they expected them to leave. City Council has defined affordable housing as 80% of the market price, allowing market prices to set the levels instead of what people actually make. So our next question is, as City Councillor, what is your position on how to satisfy the need for deeply affordable and livable housing in Toronto? And what stakeholders would you work with to make this possible? And the first person to answer this question is Sam Robinson.
More needs to be done to address affordability, especially since the city currently defines affordable housing as 80% of the market prices, which still leaves many out of reach. For example, someone on Ontario Disability Support Program receives a maximum of $1,300 a month, while even a modest one-bedroom unit often costs well over $1,500. The best approach is to incentivize private builders to create affordable rental units rather than solely focusing on condos. With a targeted tax credits, fast-tracked approvals, and support for building larger family-friendly units, we can make it attractive for developers to continue to contribute to a range of housing options by focusing on affordable rentals rather than just high-end projects. We can help meet the growing needs of Toronto families, but all three levels of government have a role here, and the city's active partnership with provincial and federal counterparts will be essential. I also see value in exploring tiny home communities like those in Halifax and Waterloo, which use city-owned land like empty lots that are not being regularly used by the public to provide private, dignified, and sustainable housing. Models like a better tent city in Waterloo could serve Toronto well, as they provide community-centered living solutions. Supportive housing is also key. Those coming from long-term homelessness may require assistance adjusting to life indoors. Adding trained support staff and funding from the Ministry of Health, we could ensure that these residents feel secure and supported in their new environments. Through a cooperative approach with private developers, community organizations, and all levels of government, we can build sustainable, affordable, and supportive housing solutions that reflect the values of Ward 15, Toronto at large. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next, Shakla Sharapova.
So, okay, thank you very much for this question. So just a moment ago, I just decided, instead of reading all my points, just to tell you about how does it look like to live in an affordable housing. So by the time we landed in Toronto, my children were 8, 10, and 11 years old. So my youngest one, he has severe autism, and he has a global developmental disability. So we rented 2-bedroom apartment. This is what we could afford by that time. And of course, 1 bedroom for parents and 1 bedroom for my child with autism, and just 2 older children. We said, okay, just share the living room. But nighttime, my daughter, she said, no, I would be sleeping with my brother who has autism, just taking care of him, and his sleeping was very disturbing. So somehow he liked to sleep on her. So he would just lay down on her, and this is the way he was sleeping. And she wouldn't move because she didn't want to disturb his sleeping. And of course, by morning time, her body was all in ache because of that person was sleeping on her. And this is how she was going to school time. But I didn't know that was happening. Only when she got married and she moved out, she said, oh, finally I'm free of this body ache. And I said, what are you talking about? And this is when she shared her story that, like every night he would sleep on me, and morning time it was horrible for me. And it's one case, and when canvassing, if you canvass go to Thorncliffe Park families, believe me, no children from any household has own room. They don't know even what does it mean like to have own room. And what I want to say, we live only one time, and our kids only have one childhood. So just let's make sure all together they have a decent life, they have own room, or at least own corner to make a homework. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sheena Sharp.
Okay. So just so we're on the same page, deeply affordable housing is where a person's income is so low that they cannot possibly be served by the private development industry, because the cost of building and the cost of land and putting it all together would result in a mortgage that is simply too high. So for deeply affordable housing, we need subsidies, and those subsidies are usually free land, grants for construction, or rent geared to income. And as Reverend Milton said, 10 years for a studio, 15 years for a 3-bedroom. By the time you get that, your kids who you wanted to put in those bedrooms will be gone. And so the city is responsible for social housing. The province provides a subsidy, and we pay the rest through our taxes. And until recently, the subsidy for Toronto was essentially 0, and some municipalities got 1/3. So we're slowly getting more money, and we are playing catch up. I think in this, frankly, insane rental market, the cheapest way to provide subsidies is not RGIs, but to provide free land and subsidies directly to the construction industry on a per unit basis. It's done a lot. So when I say free land, I mean, look at the crosstown. We have all these beautiful little jewel box stations. There should be housing on top of that, right? We should be making the most of the city land. We should be making the most of remaindered buildings. I would agree with the new city's move to move development work in-house. In other words, take the profit out of it. And also, I would have agreed to move construction management in-house, because I think the solution for deeply affordable housing is how can we provide decent housing but make our dollars go as far as we can, and that kind of means we need about 100 solutions put together in order to get even close. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Jason Stevens, you're next. Just wait for the clock to reset. Okay, go ahead, Jason.
As I mentioned the model in Finland before, I've been to 3 universities that have a lot of academic journals and research on the issue of homelessness, U of T, McMaster, and the University of Ottawa. What makes Jason Stevens' campaign different, and why I'm actually going to work diligently to ensure, diligently as I can, to lift people out of homelessness, is because I started working on this issue 25 years ago. I volunteered at the Ottawa Mission for Men. I've been homeless. My mother, who's in the room, many of you met, when she first immigrated to Canada in 1963, worked in Vancouver with many homeless youth as a child, youth, and service worker. So it's in my family already to do this. If you want change, then electing me, I think the Stevens campaign will enact the change we want. And here's how I already, about the millionth way I've already tried to work on this issue. Recently I met with the chief city planner, the senior city planner, that's his title, of the City of Toronto, not the city manager. So the city planner is the one who actually issues the permits to developers. It happens that he and I are in the same community group. So I have a good rapport with him. And I think when you're electing a city councillor, what you want to look for is a track record, like I have at McMaster, of serving the community and getting an award from the president of that university, Dr. Peter George, for outstanding community service. With respect to the current city administration, Mayor Olivia Chow is one of my customers. So I know her and I have a good rapport with her. It doesn't mean I agree. I take a more common sense approach. But with the city planner that I met over and over this summer, we already discussed our relationship. I can tell you that that relationship is more valuable than any campaign budget, than more lawn signs or glitz or anything else. And I will work with him to solve homelessness.
Thank you very much. Our last question, and after our last question, we will set up a mic on the floor so people can ask the candidates questions. Our last question deals with existing housing availability in the city. Many condos and homes are being built or bought as investment properties. The owners expect to make a quick profit, raising the price of rentals and ownership alike. Often, these properties are left empty, providing housing to no one in a city which is short of housing. The City of Toronto has a vacant home tax which is meant to address this problem. It started out at 1% and is rising to 3%. So our question is, what are your views of the vacant home tax? Will you support it or increase it? What do you think can be done to reduce the number of empty residences so that more people can have a truly affordable place to live? And this question is addressed first to Leslie Stoyan.
So the vacant home tax is, in essence, a good concept. The issue lies within the execution of the program and the bureaucracy involved in maintaining it. It's too nuanced, too many exemptions to monitor, relying solely on self-reporting. In its first rollout year, hundreds of thousands of residents missed the deadline, and not because they're dishonest, tax-evading citizens. It's simply because it was not clearly outlined on their property tax bill, and it largely went unnoticed. So this created unnecessary stress to already overloaded taxpayers, and in 2021, when we were in the depths of pandemic darkness. So I see these types of broken administrative processes in many of the city projects, so we really need to audit this initiative, ensure that the guidelines are clear, properly communicated to residents, empowering them with knowledge to manage their own municipal responsibilities. And it's our job as city staff to make sure that those reporting processes are efficient and manageable. The most crucial part of this tax is going after the land bankers and using our limited bureaucratic resources to identify them, hold them accountable, and if it's rolled out effectively, not just 1%, why should it be easy for foreign investors to scoop up properties and arguably profiteer off of our housing crisis? So we need to reevaluate this initiative. One of my most valuable tools in my municipal toolkit is my Rolodex of community champions. And in this case, we need to connect with experts to help refine the Toronto tax, which has resulted in wasted administrative spending and frustrated taxpayers, but has the potential to generate crucial revenue for our city. So we start with conversation and collaboration, community partnerships with trusted real estate agents and social services, combining pragmatics with vision and care. And in terms of reducing the number of empty residences, simple. Stop building so many luxury condos, making it easy for foreign investors to snatch them up.
Thank you very much. And next, Daniel Trays.
Yeah, so if I sat here, I echo everything Leslie said, because if I sat here and tried to tell you I'm an expert in the vacant home tax thing, I'd be a liar. The fact of the matter is, I live in an RGI unit in TCHC, so I take real offense, and excuse me a second, it really hurts my feelings when somebody says we don't need RGI units, because that means I don't mean jack to anybody, and that's not right. Over the years, getting developers to lean on more affordable housing programs has been like a 30-year root canal. On top of that, we have a provincial government that seems to hand out favors like it's Halloween candy. Years and years go into planning these projects only to have municipal decisions overturned by provincially run appeal boards. Two things are key for the file of affordable housing. One is to make connections, again, like fellow candidates have said, make connections with the city staff running these departments. I've already done that from 2018 to 2023. I've had talks with the deputy city manager in charge of the file of building, and that's Jag Sharma. He used to be the TCHC CEO, and I have faith in their team. The second thing is a councillor must have the appropriate staff in place to provide community engagement, which has been lacking here in Ward 15 since we lost Jay, and receive results that work well for the community as a whole. I could say more about this, but like the fact of the matter is, there's people of us, if I didn't have that RGI unit, I'd be dead. Okay, I want that to sink into your heads. I'd be dead. Instead, I got housed in 2016 after waiting 12 years for housing. Flukily met Councillor Paul Ainsley on a train, which I give credit to him and his staff for taking me through the way civics work. And here we are today. So if there was no RGI units, and there was no help within the shelter system, I wouldn't be talking to you all right now. I tell you that straight up as a person from neighborhoods that go through this. Work together, elect the person that's going to be your city councilor for your day-to-day issues. Kathleen Wynn's not going to shovel your driveway. Evan Sambasivan's not going to get you an RGI unit. And goddamn, we all, pardon my language, but we all know Doug Ford ain't going to do jack for any of us.
And our last answer before we go to the questions from the floor comes from Rachel Chernos-Lynn.
So
You need a mic.
I am supportive of the vacant home tax as a policy tool to reduce the number of vacant homes. I will say that the rollout last year was not effective and caused a lot of stress, particularly for seniors and for those where there were language barriers, and I've certainly heard about it going door to door. We have to remember that the intent of the vacant home tax was not a revenue generator for the city. It was really meant as a way to get those units online to people. And I think that's really where the focus has to be. I'm certainly happy to see that the city has raised it to 3% and that they've done an overhaul. This came to the city in October. That's really going to have a customer service approach. But I think really the next step to get this going is to think about how they're going to market these units and to encourage them to be rolled out to people as rental units. There were 800,000 people who were surveyed to get 8,000 homes. So we know there are homes. We have to just make sure now that the city is using the funds from that to really focus on how we market those 8,000 homes and encourage the owners to rent them out. And that's really the job ahead for staff. And I will be looking as a city councillor to make sure that we're doing that. And I think that really has to be the focus. And I would say that as we move forward, our focus has to be on finding a way to administer the vacant home tax in a way where 800,000 people don't necessarily need to be surveyed. The onus really has to be on making sure that those units that are available are located to city staff, and then working with those landlords to get them out to people. And I think there are ways to do that, working with community organizations to help identify how to do that, and working with city staff on a very structured approach on how to get that out. Thank you.
And thank you very much, everyone, for keeping to the envelope of 2 minutes. That helps us out a lot because it means that we do have time for questions from the floor. So I'm just going to wait for us to get the microphone set up. I'd encourage you, if you have a question, to try and keep it to under a minute, and let the folks on the stage know who you would like to answer your question. If you ask everybody, your question could take 10 minutes to answer, and that's not fair to other people who would like to ask a question. So if you could direct your question to 1 or 2 or 3 at the most candidates, that'd be great. And if you've only got one candidate in mind and some other candidates would like to provide an answer, if they can do so shortly, that would be great.
Question.
Okay, are we set? Okay, go ahead, please.
My question is directed to Rachel Chernos-Lynn. You have been a disaster as the chairman of the Toronto District School Board. You have allowed anti-Semitism to escalate. You supported DEI and critical race theory. You bully Wei Dong Pai, the one trustee with an ounce of common sense at that board. And you were the chairman when Richard Bilkstow committed suicide. Why do you think you'd make a good councillor at City Hall, given your track record at the TDSB? And I've covered the Toronto District School Board for years, Rachel, so I know all about it. Of course, it is absolutely the time to ask.
So
Okay,
I think
you've
my
asked your
record
question.
stands for itself. I have worked really hard to ensure that we have inclusive spaces for all of our students, whether they come to school as kids who are from the LGBT community, whether they wear a hijab, whether they are Jewish and want to wear a Star of David. I have stood as someone who brings people together, who is not divisive, but who stands up for everyone against hate and creates inclusive environments. And I'll tell you why that's important. It's important because whenever a student walks in a door of our school, it's really important that they feel included and safe. It is the basis for how kids learn, how they come to school ready to learn and with an open mind and acceptance towards others. It cuts down bullying, and that's really the basis of, I think, a civil society and having respect for each other. So I'm deeply proud of my record as a school trustee and as chair of the Toronto District School Board.
No.
So I would say to Ms. Sue-Ann Levy, thank you for the question. I'd be happy to, of course, take this online or offline. This forum is really about homelessness, the unhoused, making sure that we're talking about affordable housing and how the city moves forward with that. I think my platform has been very clear in terms of my skills that I have demonstrated as a school board trustee as someone who lives in this ward, as someone who has a very strong track record of accomplishing things, of getting work done, which is really the basis of what a city councillor has to do. A city councillor's role is to take the concerns of the community, and there have been a number of really impressive questions this evening and really good answers from my colleagues who are up on the stage with me tonight about the challenges facing our community in Don Valley West. And I think that's really where the focus should be. And if you wish to discuss my record with me, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. But I think tonight's focus is really on affordable housing and on the unhoused. Thank you.
And I think actually, just so that we can keep on track, let's use the clock for the answers again. So let's have, each candidate can have 2 minutes to answer. And I reiterate what Rachel just said, that this is a forum on housing and homelessness and social housing. So if we could keep the questions to that topic, that would be terrific. So, sir.
I would thank you very much, and thank you for making this about homelessness. And I think it's a glaring reality that one of the leading candidates, Anthony Furey, doesn't mention homelessness in his actual platform card. And frankly, a lot of you basically talked a lot of nonsense about it that didn't make any sense. So I just want to cut to the chase in terms of the people who I think have a chance of winning this election, which is Rachel, Anthony, and Sheena. And my question to you guys with regard to homelessness, what makes you think that being a councillor, given the fact that you have virtually no juice to get anything done, when we've got a government in Ottawa and a government at Queen's Park who thwarts every attempt for us to do something that's good for the city? So I would like to start with Sheena. What makes you think that we can actually move the needle on these things given the situation that we're facing with Doug Ford in Queen's Park, who basically wants to be the mayor of Toronto, and the federal government basically being absent at the table? Thank you.
I think that the City Council has control over approvals, for example, and zoning. I don't think we can solve all of the problems, but I do think we can solve the problems, and even as one councillor out of 26, I think it's possible to make deals with other people about what's important, and in that way we can do our part. And I think we should also stand up to senior levels of government. Like, if we think something has to be done, don't back down and say, oh, well, they'll never approve it, so I won't do it. No, that just gives them the power. Stand up, tell them what we need, and make them turn us down. Like, we have to do that. Otherwise, we're just acquiescing.
Okay, thank you. And sir, you, who did you ask? I want to make sure. Anthony and Rachel. So Anthony, why don't you go next?
Yeah, one thing I didn't get the opportunity to talk about in the previous questions, and I think this relates to the issue of dealing with affordable housing, social housing, how we can be better at our targets, is all of the ills that plague the private sector construction also are plaguing social housing and community housing, affordable housing development. By that I mean all of the red tape is immense across the board. So when you hear a private developer complain about it, that also applies to a not-for-profit housing developer. So I can give you two examples. There's a revitalization project right now for Alexandra Park downtown, and they are very delayed. They're behind schedule immensely. The planning department, even though they have more staff than ever, and there's actually charts that have been produced that show more staff, slower results. So we have a major situation here when it comes to efficiently managing these processes. So many of the charges, the fees, the red tape, they're obviously different based on private versus not-for-profit, but it's still something that troubles all of them. There's an organization called Housing Now that works to create affordable housing projects, and they have a Wilson Heights project that is 4 years behind, and they are desperate to break ground on it, and they can't do it because of red tape. So getting rid of the red tape, getting rid of the fact that 25% of the costs of a unit come from government, getting rid of all these timelines, because time is money, whether you're a private developer or whether you're not for-profit developer. These things are all interrelated. So we just have to be much more efficient We have to bring about accountability when it comes to these. I do also want to say I do not support the vacant home tax. It was a model based on what's happening in Vancouver, and their whole situation is very different than here in Toronto. That was an absolute boondoggle. We need accountability for everything at City Hall, and I'm gobsmacked because it costs so much to deal with that no one was let go over that mismanagement.
Okay, thank you. And Rachel, if you could respond.
Thank you for the question. I think there are a number of different things we can be doing. I do agree with Sheena that we need to be pushing back against the province, and I also think we need to be pushing for more funding from all levels of government. I think those are key. I think Toronto absorbs a lot of challenges, and it's a higher cost of doing business in our city, and yet the benchmarks don't meet that all the time. So I think, I'm happy to see that the mayor achieved a new deal for Toronto, but I think we actually deserve more than what was achieved. And so I think there is work to be done there. I also think we need to look at the different types of housing that we could be building and that we could be fast tracking. We see a lot of 46-story towers being proposed in development just south of here. That reaches a lot of pushback from residents. But I do think if we were looking for more moderate housing along the main streets and avenues, there would be less pushback. We would be able to move these and build them faster, and they would be perhaps a better model for affordable housing. I also think as we look to Thorncliffe Park and the Ontario line being built as a transit-oriented community, we have to be really focused that we're working as a city with developers who are really conscious about working for affordable housing as a significant portion of that. Right now, it's zoned as 5% affordable housing. That means that the Thorncliffe Park community largely will be left out of the housing that is planned for there. So I think we have to, as a city council and as the local city councillor, I think we have to be really ensuring that we're working to achieve goals that meet the needs of the community that we serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Next question. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, Daniel? Yep. Can we turn on Daniel's mic? No. Use the microphone.
So just a quick answer to that last comment and question here. The combined service at City Hall, I was a council liaison to Toronto Community Housing. Those are the people that house these homeless people that the gentleman was talking about. The combined experience for Anthony Fury and Rachel Chernos-Lynn down at City Hall, 0. Me, 5 years and 19 years homeless. So if you think that me saying what I'm saying up here tonight is hogwash or whatever word was used, that is fine. Opinions are allowed. But I'm sick and tired of this singular narrative that it's Anthony Fury and Rachel Chernos-Lynn. I have the experience, both lived and work experience, but I do appreciate you voicing your concern.
Thank you. Next questions, please, sir.
Lift TOC, putting together the community benefits agreement, which there is no community benefits agreement, so there is no 5% allocated for affordable housing in the Thorncliffe TOC right now. So I just want to clarify that.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question. I'm going to move on to the next question since we've heard from lots of people. Please, sir.
My question is addressed to Mr. Fury, and a couple of facts to precede my question. The one is that you ran for mayor 2 years ago, or thereabouts. The other is that you don't live in the riding. And the question is that there have been some suggestions that you're not really focused on the issues in this ward, that you're basically using us as a springboard to become mayor in a couple of years' time, and how do you respond to that point?
Yeah.
No, this is general questions.
Yeah, we're not actually accepting general questions. We're asking people to address housing and affordable housing. You can talk to Mr. Fury after if you would like to have an answer to that question. Let's stick to the content of this meeting.
Well, in terms of housing.
Could you come closer to the mic, please?
In terms of housing, I'm wondering, Tony or Anthony, where do you live in our riding?
So I grew up
So not actually in our riding? Okay, thanks.
Okay, again, One of the reasons we called this is that we're well aware that there are people who all through the city are suffering from a lack of housing, right? So let's try and stick to the questions which address people who are suffering from a lack of housing, please.
Hi, I'd like to address this, I think, to Sam Robinson and Anthony Fury and Sheena Sharp. The elephant in the room here is not being sufficiently addressed. In 2023, the federal government brought in 1,300,000 people during a year where we made 300,000 housing units. I'm concerned that whatever we do here is never going to catch up to what they're doing there. And I just like your thoughts on that.
So if Sam could answer first, please.
So I think Toronto is a place for everyone. The more the merrier. And of course, there is a bit of a housing issue going on, and it's a work in progress. And I'm here to listen to the community. I'm here to listen to the experts. I know there's a lot of experts about homelessness in this room, so afterwards, I would love to hear from anyone that wants to speak to me. Thanks.
And Sheena? Can we turn on Sheena's mic, please? Okay, go ahead.
I think it's kind of obvious that we cannot absorb people at the rate that we had been absorbing them, both in terms of temporary foreign workers, which was the biggest part, and foreign students who were sometimes not actually students. And so but I do think that the federal government has got the memo, and they are starting to bring the levels down. That doesn't really help people who can't find an apartment right now. So I think we have to keep the pressure up, and also keep the lines open to the federal government to say, like, most people come to Toronto, right? Many people come to Toronto because we have so many diverse communities, and you can come and you can join with other people who came from the same place you did, and it's an easier transition. But we need to get more. This is where one of the places we have to step up to the federal government and say, okay, whatever the level is, you need to back that up with funding, and you need to make sure that you're giving us enough funding for the amount of people that you're bringing in. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Fury, if you could answer, please.
Yeah, so many of the infrastructure issues we're dealing with here are a supply and demand issue, both the physical presence of the entity, whether it's the number of trains we have on public transit, whether it's the number of housing units. So we can, of course, we are building more housing, but also obviously if you bring in far more people than you can conceivably build housing units, you're not going to see the housing crisis alleviated. So I think Sheena makes some very good points there. And I know the federal government is cooling things down in terms of volumes of people entering the country. And I've had two interesting recurring experiences at the door. One is that I'll encounter people, well, for instance, people on my own team, the gentleman from Thorncliffe Park, who they're helping me out. Some of those guys have said, look, you know, we see the people who are arriving regularly at Pearson Airport, and these gentlemen come from the same countries that we came from, and we certainly have no prejudice against them. But look, we don't have doctors right now. Our children don't have spaces at the swimming lessons, and we don't have space on the roads and so much. So please, you know, we got to calm things down here. And the other flip side is when I'm door knocking and you come to a house where someone says, well, I'm not a citizen, I can't vote, but you know, I'm a student or whatnot, I have my PR, and a lot of people, a lot of new immigrants, they may be here very recently, or they've been here 7 or 8 years, they say, I'm thinking of getting out of Toronto, because Canada isn't what I was expecting. Like, oh boy, the housing prices are through the roof. The services are not what I thought. I can't get a doctor. This never used to happen before. We all know, you know, most of us, our parents are immigrants, and you come here, and then you stay here for many decades, and you second generation, third generation. We have people who came here 10 years ago, 20 years ago, who are going back now because they don't see that they have a future in Canada. That is a new phenomenon, and it's really troubling. So I think we should see some changes in policy at all levels of government to deal with this, because I began my remarks talking about how Toronto being a city in decline and a city where people feel like they're leaving, and that applies, I think, to all categories of people. It's a true tragedy.
Thank you very much. Next question, Bonnie. Oh, sorry. Let's see. Yeah, okay, let's switch it to a minute. Just it's 9:14, and we wanted to finish by 9:30. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Bonnie?
I just want to say that there are 11 people here. One person is going to win. You all have good ideas. And people came here tonight because they're concerned about homeless. We're all responsible. We need to work together. There are churches that are closing that have property that we can build on, or smaller churches, keep a worship space, build on. We can't allow one person to do it.
Question, please.
So I'm just asking if each of you will commit to working together with the one person who ends up winning. Thank you.
Can I answer that one? So I have I think I'm up to 14 active constituency cases right now when I go door to door from various residents. I keep a notebook and I keep a promise to everybody who I speak to. So this is a great question that you just asked. And I say, if I am fortunate enough to be elected, I will absolutely be in touch with you as soon as this is all over. And if I am not, I will be handing over that book to any of us up here and say, please do good things with the information that I learned. Because absolutely everybody needs to be working together. We need to stop the mudslinging. We need to be working together as a city and remember our role as city councillor, which is to liaise between the ward we represent and the city at large. That is our role. So great question. Anybody else?
Great, thank you. And Jason Stevens would like to answer, and then Rachel.
Bonnie, thank you. 20 years ago, I worked as a constituency staff member for the Honorable David Christopherson under the Ray government. So the answer was given, if I can say so humbly, or assertively, 20 years ago, I worked with city staff, with politicians, and with community groups like United Church and the Canadian Labour Congress, and unions to fight against homelessness. If I've been doing it 25 years ago, the answer, Bonnie, to your question is, there's no darn doubt that I will work with this councillor, and I hope that this councillor is Jason Stevens.
Thank you. And Rachel is next, and then Sheena, and then we'll move on to the next question.
Listen, being a city councillor, you get work done by collaboration, whether it's through collaboration with your colleagues, collaboration with staff, city staff. You can't do it without any of those people, but you also can't do it without all the experience that your community provides you with. So throughout this campaign over the last several months, I have learned a tremendous amount from my colleagues who are sitting up at the table here. Sheena brings tremendous knowledge as an architect and her experience in building housing. Leslie has tremendous knowledge on community events. Anthony Fury, I don't always see the world from the same perspective as you, but you bring ideas and you have hit a nerve clearly throughout the city and in our community. Each one of the candidates here brings something. And I would just say that as a trustee, I held coffee mornings every 6 weeks, and I learned so much from the people who came to those coffee mornings. That's where I got many of the brainchilds and saw people making connections throughout. And that's something that I think we would do for sure, and I hope that my colleagues will come to my coffee mornings if I'm fortunate enough to be elected. Thank you.
Thank you. And so, Sheena, you have a minute as well, and then we're going to have to move on.
So my day job is working on housing affordability, and I vow to continue to be working on that in one way or another. And if I am not councillor, I vow to be one of the most ornery constituents on this topic. Thank you.
Okay, if that's the case, yes, please go ahead.
So now, this city is also my home, and this is where I want to put all my strength, all my knowledge, all my potential to make someone's life better. And this is why I'm running, and no matter the results, I'm going to continue my work to advocate for vulnerable people. And of course, I would be advocating for people who are homeless and try my best to support those people, because behind that homelessness, you know, there are many other problems like unemployment, mental health issues, some life hardships. So I can help. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next question, please.
So I'm happy to hear from anyone who talked about supportive housing, but just to narrow it down for the sake of time, I know, Sam, you talked about the tiny homes idea in lots, and Sheena, you talked about free land in exchange for affordable housing. And I think there were a lot of great ideas about, in the big picture, what we want to do for affordable housing and supportive housing. But I work with a group called More Neighbors, and we are going to community engagement meetings on the ground trying to get these projects built. And one thing that we see is that once you get to a specific site, you get a lot of pushback. And so I think what I'd really like to hear from the people who want to be counselor is what kind of leadership that they would show. And so my specific question is, are there specific sites in Don Valley West that you think would be appropriate for the kinds of projects that you talked about in terms of supportive housing?
Okay, and who would like to take it? Can I see a show of hands just so I can know who's going to get it? Okay, so Daniel, Sheena, yeah, Peter. Okay, so let's start at the end. Daniel, you've got a minute.
Yeah, so thanks for the question there for all of us here. As you would know if you've been involved in a couple of the campaigns in the last municipal election as well, I actually worked on the campaign of Evan Sambasivan the last time he was there. And I find that we need, I don't know any specific sites here in Don Valley West, but you do need to collaborate with the community as a whole, as well as city officials and developers. This is what I've been doing for the past 30 years. 5 years officially at City Hall. And it just flabbergasts me the amount of time we spend on this Anthony Furey, Rachel Chernos Lynn campaign, which is what this is. This is what this is. Has any of you, raise your hand if you've seen me on the media? None of you. On, in, around the media. Thank you for that. This is a campaign about two people. And it's unfortunate because we're here tonight to learn about housing and homelessness and experience at City Hall. Here it is.
Okay, thank you. And Sheena, you're next. 1 minute, please.
So I think that you can't put $15 billion in the ground or a subway through Thorncliffe Park without allowing higher limits there. I think that Bayview, for example, and Laird all should be zoned. I know that I believe Bayview has already been zoned, but for 6 stories, I think they should all be 6 stories. I think we should put in the single stair so that you don't have to accumulate lots in order to build something. So those are the sites that I would concentrate on first. Any major street, Mount Pleasant, north of Eglinton, and south of Eglinton. To right now, I mean, there's some that are already zoned for higher levels, but I think every other street, every other major and minor street that's a tributary should be 6 stories minimum. As of right, no zoning processes required.
Thank you, Sheena. And Peter, I believe you wanted to speak to this.
Thank you. So let's see here. The way the City of Toronto is charging on a per unit basis, in 5 years, you can look forward to no inventory coming online, condominium or otherwise. As your counselor, I want to walk into City Council and have polite discussions, but also make it known that Ward 15 has sent me with a mandate. Ward 15 wants to be a sleepy bedroom community as it has been until it's gotten prodded, poked, and people are sick of that, which leads me to the multiplex or the fourplexes springing up like dandelions. I don't think it would be appropriate citywide, not necessarily Ward 15. If there's going to be a discussion about affordable housing, it should be centric on commercial strip. Okay. Now, as far as density, I think the realistic question is, can we do a little bit better than 6 and lower than
thank you. Does anyone else want to respond to the previous question? No? Okay, please, sir.
Well, good evening, folks. My name is Tom Robertson. I live a few blocks away from here. And I want to thank you all for putting your hat in the ring and sitting up here tonight and answering these questions. And thank you, Reverend, for the land acknowledgement. That was probably the nicest land acknowledgement I've heard since we started doing these. My question is for Daniel. I really appreciate your candor this evening. You've been very open and frank. You talked about lived experience of homelessness. Can you talk to us a little bit about that experience in the context of, if you're elected councillor, how will you interact with law enforcement around their job, their difficult job in dealing with homelessness in our city?
Yeah, great question. I thank you for that. So just a little bit about my homelessness, because we only have limited time. From 97 to 2016, I was couch surfing, stayed in every single shelter in the city of Toronto, except for the Good Shepherd down on Queen Street, because they had a curfew. And with regards to the question about the TPS, my mother's here tonight, who is an actual 33-year member of the Toronto Police Service Civilian Unit. And as well, in my time at City Council, I served on something called the Safety Network of Toronto. That's where representatives from 3 different levels of government, we had our meetings at the Boys and Girls Club at the time. We go and discuss the major issues, such as the recent tow truck wars, gang wars, and shooting, with all the police officers around the City of Toronto and the Mayor's office, to ensure that we have the best programs going forward. All I can say to you is I will continue that work, and that is what I will do, as well as having monthly town hall meetings.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have anything to say to that question on relationships with the police? No? Okay. This will have to be our last question. We've pretty much run out of time. I'm sorry, we're just... if yours is short and the answers are short, then we could fit another question in.
I'll try to make it as short as I can. Thank you. My question is about Airbnb. This is for anyone who is willing to answer. Do you believe that Airbnb plays a role in the housing crisis in Toronto, specifically affordable housing? If no, can you explain why? If yes, can you explain what you would do as councillor to make a change?
Anyone like to take that?
On this. Airbnb scares me. So I am a condo owner. I live in a very small unit in Davisville Village. Airbnb really does need to be cracked down upon. I don't necessarily, again, I don't have enough research on this. I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea in looking at solutions. However, the lines are really blurry there. We had an Airbnb unit beside us. There was a very complicated meth lab going on. An overdose happened, resulting in death. And this was through Airbnb. There was another unit in our condo that was really challenged. So I think it's a great idea. It has to be very carefully patrolled and policed. And these are, again, services that we have to put the administrative processes in place with our experts in public housing and in social services. So I think more to come on that one. Somebody else want to take it?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you're on.
So as a realtor, I deal with Airbnb issues, day to day. The many stories, just like, a lot of haunting stories. Like somebody started Airbnb, 10 transactions went through, made a lot of money. 11th guy came in, destroyed the whole thing, and the insurance wasn't enough to cover it. So things like that happen, and it's an issue. It has to be, I think, highly regulated. So the regulation is not in place yet. It's a new concept again, so it needs a lot of consultation, a lot of discussion between shareholders, because people will lose money if we shut down Airbnb. So again, you have to have town hall meetings, understand, put list of bylaws together to protect every and each aspect of it. So it needs a lot of work to be done, and then that's what I'm going to do to work on it and then solve every and each single issue step by step. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to take this one? And then we'll go to our last question. So, yeah, go ahead, Peter.
If I look at renting a vehicle, why not have a photo of a before, during, and after the time that it's tenanted, okay, however short. So However, the brain comes up with ideas to make a buck. There's always going to be, somehow, somewhere where, the bad of the intent will overshadow where the good intent might be. If it's regulated in such a way where there's an empty unit and it can be authenticated by a timestamp where it's empty, then that's half the battle as far as anything illicit or bad going on. As far as the availability of a unit, okay, where one desires to make it as an Airbnb, I believe in the adoption of democracy with capitalism in mind. If somebody wants to rent it, they should rent it. Or?
Thank you very much. Okay, and our last question, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amina, and I'm appreciate you bring all candidates here. We all get that chance. My question, from all these candidates, and include this hall who are invited here, this is the only Don Valley West election, not whole Toronto. So I have a question. Did anybody survey how many homeless in Don Valley West? This is my question. Because they're serving Don Valley West. They're not going to serving whole Toronto. So I have a question, how many homeless in Don Valley West? Can anybody answer that question, please?
So the question is, how many homeless people
In
are
Don
there
Valley
in Don
West.
Valley West?
Yes.
Okay, who would like to take it? Okay, Daniel first, and then Jason.
Know that number fluctuates from night to night, but for Toronto, I know 10,000 homeless people every night is counted. In
No,
Toronto.
Don Valley West, I ask.
Yeah,
Only Don Valley West.
The question is for Don Valley West. Okay, so Daniel, you had your hand up?
Yeah, so as we get to the exact number here, I don't know the exact number. You are correct, Shaklo, there's around 10,000. And when they say 1/3 or 2/3 are recently landed immigrants, the fact of the matter is that as a city councillor, you can't get nothing passed without your colleagues' approval. You need a first person to set the motion through, which goes through committee meetings and then to city council, and you need a seconder of that motion. So unless you have the collaboration of at least one of your colleagues or 13 of a majority, the programs aren't going to be there. You have to work together, but it's around 10,000, so if you divide
No,
that by the
10,000
25 areas.
It belongs to Toronto. And
As a
Don Valley West, let me explain you. I drive on city, lots of time. COVID time, every night I drive downtown. No homeless. Where the homeless gone? Everybody keeps saying here, oh, homeless, homeless, homeless. What is the nonsense? Because if you drive, COVID time, you will see downtown. I drive on the Don Valley West, 2 homeless, I see only Lee Side area, 2 homeless, that's it.
So sorry, did you say there was no homeless downtown?
No, I'm telling Don Valley West because you are all running for one of them running Don Valley West. You're not running whole Toronto. So I have question for Don Valley West. How many homeless, because they bring a question wrong. Because how many homeless in Don Valley West? Then they can bring up this question here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sheena has her hand up for that, and Jason would like to answer, and so would I. So, first?
As far as I can tell, I can't figure it out, and as far as I can tell, no one's counting it by ward. But we certainly see people camping in the ravines. We see people camping on the Beltline. And furthermore, what's worse than that is there are buildings that are in our ward, like at the top of Foreman Avenue, there's a little 32-unit apartment building. All those guys are being rent-evicted, and they are going to be homeless. And there's a 13-story building on Erskine that is being demolished, and all those people are very likely to become homeless. So we are, if they're not going to stay here, we're at least generating them in Don Valley West, and we have to do something about it.
Okay, and Jason, you wanted to speak?
Thanks, Mike, thanks, Ms. Desai, for the question. I think, first of all, the definition of homelessness in the city, I think, is only people who are living on the street. But the amount of people in Don Valley West, a ward of 100,000 people, the amount of renters who don't own their homes, but more seriously are hundreds of dollars away from losing a place to live, is, I'm going to guess, is probably closer to 10 to 15,000 people. And I think, Ms. Desai, I really respect the question. I understand I have a different answer, and the Stevens campaign believes very strongly that I don't think what's important here is not as a city councillor to know plus or minus 1,000 how many homeless people it is. It's that how much my heart says we must fight homelessness. We have to solve this issue. It concerns all of us from the 401. For my family lives not far from Banbury Road and this rather affluent area to Thorncliffe Park, where so many people are, to battle rent, to make rent, are living 10 people in a home. So my passion in 30 years of working to fight as a student union leader, to work on the streets, and there's 42 seconds left, but the mic's, hello? Oh, okay. So I hope to fight homelessness, and I will.
Okay. Habiba?
So, okay, well, I don't want to fail, and it's my mom that asked the question. So the reason she would know a little bit is because we actually drive around giving food to homeless people. We don't do it as part of an NGO. We just do it when we have events, even during elections. There's events and there's food left over. We take it and we give it. So there's certain people that we are, they're part of our, like I know, like she knows about the 2 people in Leaside, for example. So whenever we have certain food, like there's certain, different homeless people have different food needs. They have different housing. There's so many different needs per person. But in general, she kind of has an idea of how much homeless are in the Toronto Danforth area, in the Leaside, not all the way north, all the way down to 401, but at least all the way up to Leaside. We do know who the homeless that are there are, and we do provide food to them sometimes if we have. We also do this with refugees, to your Airbnb question. So we have one refugee family, 35 people living in one house, okay? So it's not just an Airbnb issue, it's also a level of wages. So can you even afford to pay rent? So if everyone could afford to pay, then would we even have this housing crisis? So there's a level of inflation in wages that's responsible too. I'm gonna stop.
Okay, thank you. And how about we make this last answer from Sam, and then we'll call it a night. It is a little bit past 9:30. So go ahead, Sam, and please keep it to a minute, please.
So, how many homeless people are in Don Valley West? The answer is too many. And most homeless people don't look any different than the average person in this room. Most homeless people don't sleep on the street every night. They move between couches in their friends' houses. And if we're going to give these people somewhere to live, I'm all about locally based planning. So if we're going to give them somewhere to live, it needs to be okay with the communities around that area. It needs to be in a place that people aren't using already, like a park. And I think that this is a real issue that we need to all do something about. It can't just be government. It can't just be the municipality. It has to be the communities, the NGOs. Everyone has to get involved if we're going to see any real change here. So thank you.
All right, and I would like to thank all of you who came out tonight. I know that you've been busy campaigning, and it's been a really hard slog, so thank you very much for giving your time up for tonight. And can we give a round of applause to everyone who came out, please? And I'd like to thank all of you for also sharing your time this evening, and those of you online. And this was streamed to YouTube, so it's all being recorded. So if you go to the Lawrence Park Community Church YouTube channel, you'll find this there. So if you want to share it with your friends, you can. Thank you very much, and good night.